Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner University, where we do not count episodes because I can't remember which one we're on. I am very happy to be joined today by Ethan Grossman, IFBB Pro, and co-owner of Modern Meathead with Ben Giannis, who we had on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I am actually very excited for this conversation because very few people know Ethan. He's kind of an enigma. He only got Instagram a couple weeks ago because Ben made him do it. But incredible backstory, going from, almost not being able to walk, winning his IFBB Pro card, working with Stuart McGill, doing a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes. So Ethan, welcome to the podcast. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, looking forward to talking to you as well. I've heard nothing but good things from Ben, so I think we'll have a lot of commonalities here.
Yeah, I was, I mentioned in the email that I've known Ben for quite a few years now, even before he was the polarizing Instagram figure that he is today.
That's what people tell me.
I remember actually the first like full interaction I had with him, we disagreed on something on social media, and we were both like, "Hey, do you want to hop on a phone call and have a conversation about this?"
Yeah.
Like, sure, man. I think I was driving to Pittsburgh for something, and we talked for like 2.5 hours. And
Wow.
yeah, it was just like, he's a great person, great dude. So when at the end of our podcast, I always ask, if there's one person you want to see on the podcast, but you got to help me get on. He was like, you got to have Ethan on the podcast. So been excited for this. And thank you for taking the time. It's Sunday morning. So not many people are up for a podcast on Sunday mornings, but you are.
No, I specifically asked for it.
Yeah, exactly. So IFBB Pro, if I'm not mistaken, you're in your pro card at the Amateur Olympia.
That's right.
How long had you been training prior to that? How old are you?
I am 31.
Okay.
I started lifting weights at 12 years old.
Okay.
And I did my first competition at 19. And I've actually done very few competitions overall. Like I've been bodybuilding, I've been living the lifestyle. I don't really attend competitions. I don't really enjoy watching competitions. Like there's so many more like enjoyable sports to be I say sports loosely, right? Like
Right.
there's so many more enjoyable things to be a spectator of, a stream in the woods, ranging from watching leaves fall in the woods to watching people get punched in the face like in a ring, all more enjoyable than watching other men in Speedos. But, the process of it, I do find very enjoyable. So I competed as a teenager. There was like one other person in my class in the Mr. Teenage Rochester. Took home that title against one other teenager. And then the next time I competed was in 2018. Yep. So you could do the math on it. I said, I'm 31, yep. I competed at 19, right? But we're talking basically, yeah, someone else can do the math on that.
Oh, that's okay.
But yeah, so it's a long time, right? Like all those years. I don't know. Do you get like demonetized for talking about drugs on this podcast? Is that a word I can say?
No.
But basically I trained naturally for 15 years.
Yep.
I always had the mindset of I wanted to be a professional bodybuilder. I understood, what was involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
My very first bodybuilding prep coach was a guy named George Farah.
And that was your first coach?
Yeah, because it's always been one of these things I'm going to find the best guy and I'm just going to, or girl. I'm just going to find whoever the most knowledgeable person is. And from my perspective at that time, George was working with the top people. He was working with Kai. He was working with Dexter. He was working with Branch. He was, who I also used to see. I don't know if this is public knowledge, but this will blow up your podcast right here. Mm-hmm. The Rock. I used to see The Rock in there all the time.
Really?
Yeah. So remember the transition from pro wrestling Dwayne Johnson to Fast and the Furious Dwayne Johnson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Just saying.
George George Farah as your first coach. That's pretty badass.
Yeah, well, he lived in Rochester.
Oh,
So in Rochester, there was a gym called Samson's, and Samson's was owned by a guy named Jim Raquel. Jim Raquel is the head judge at the Olympia at the time.
oh,
Bob Ciccarello,
yep,
MC, also came out of that gym. Danny Padilla,
yep.
Hall of Fame bodybuilder, also came out of that gym. That's not like where I started training, just for football, like at the school gym, mowed some lawns, built a gym in my basement, painted it up, put some old equipment down there. That's kind of where it started, and then there's a World Gym down the street. So I didn't really get to Samson's until much later, but it's always been a process of like, I'm just gonna find the guy, and I'm just gonna basically like show up at his doorstep and just show him that I'm like motivated enough to find a way where we can work together. And that's pretty much been my approach since day one, and it really hasn't failed. So yeah, George coached me, but naturally, for the teenage show. I did see George actually, like we hadn't spoken in many years, but I saw him after I turned pro, which is really cool. He met, my wife and my family and all that. So that was really came full circle. But yeah. So he prepped me for that. And then I was, natural right up until the age of 27. We can talk about sort of like, why it was the right time to make that shift and everything. But there's a lot of backstory with that. And basically the premise was like, all right, I just want to see, after now, like a decade between the two, like, right, do I have the aesthetic, like the shape, the genetic tools to at least approximate what a smaller version of a pro would look like. So I dieted down in 2018, and I did a few local shows. That was the first time competing since I was a teenager. And I won my class in the first show, and then got like progressively worse placings in the later show. Probably just was too depleted, too fatigued, whatever.
Yeah, diet fatigue for sure.
You could definitely see from the shape of the physique, just having followed bodybuilding enough years, like I just wanted to see, like, do I have a weird looking physique? Like, is it, really blocky? Like, do you just not have the tools? And it was still apparent to me, even, I was competing as a light heavyweight. So, I was right at the cap around 198.
Yep.
It was still apparent to me, like, yeah, I think if I put like, 50 plus pounds on this physique, like I would look the part, like, objective enough to kind of make that decision of like, all right, this is a trial run just to see if I'm willing to take, the time and risk. Like either way, I'm going to train, either way, I'm going to do the bodybuilding thing. But like, how much are we going to put into this from like a health cost, financial cost, emotional cost perspective? And after that season, won some, lost some, but it was, pretty apparent to me that like, yeah, you got something. Like, let's give this a run. And
so
then
I'm gonna stop you there, because I think that's a very important point to just like highlight is you trained for 15 years before even deciding that you were going to give it a shot. Then you gave it a shot and said, I still have a lot more weight to put on. And we're talking, this is still 4 years ago. So you have these individuals now, because of social media, who are saying, I'm 17 years old. Do I have the genetics to be a pro? How do you know? You don't know until you've put in the 10, 15 years of work to figure out, like, does my shape, does my physique approximate something like a pro? And you don't know that till you've actually built a physique. And you're saying, am I blocky? Do I have the shape? I'm like, I did my first show at 35 years old last year. I'm like, I just looked like a refrigerator who got really lean. I'm like, I'm not going to be an IFBB Pro.
yeah. And you're realistic about it. That's the thing. So yeah, I mean, like up until, that point, I'd trained naturally. And then I was like, okay, let's imagine you wanted to be like an Olympic sprinter. You would still have some idea of like how fast are the fastest people in the world. and you're like, all right, if I run, a 12-second like 100-meter dash, it's like I'm not in the running. Like if you're, in high school, like whether you're close enough, right? Like whether you're on that trajectory.
For sure.
So having followed bodybuilding, pretty intensely, like in my teens, I knew like, all right, at almost 6 feet tall, like I'm gonna have to be a reasonably lean 300 pounds in the off season,
Yes.
if I'm gonna be competitive. Cut and dry. If you're maybe someone like a Phil Heath who's got a certain shape to the muscles, small waist, like you may be able to get away with a little bit less, but I knew realistically like that's the target. So
He's also 3 inches shorter than you. You think
that's
it's
right.
like 5'8" or 5'9"? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, someone like that, on stage at, even 220, 230, like it's still going to look like a lot of other guys, even at the same height, at maybe like a 250. So that became the goal. It was like, all right, I think I checked that box. I got pretty good feedback on, how I'm looking.
Mm-hmm.
I still, to this day, it's probably like doesn't come off in this interview, but a lot of people ask me if I'm Regan Grimes in the gym.
I could
Like
see
a
that.
lot of people come up and say that. So, people would say that, and, just generally, like I got pretty decent feedback on the show. So it was like, all right, now I have this kind of objective goal. Like, I think if I could have been like a football player or even like, orthopedically could have survived it to be a power lifter, like I probably would have went more of like a performance route.
Mm-hmm.
uh, because um, my mentality, my environment, like, and then of course, my body just lend itself towards being a bodybuilder. It's just kind of what I do naturally, just kind of who I am. It's not like a thing that's forced. But I do like the idea of having like objective measures where you can be
Yeah.
like, I bench press this much, I run this fast, and then no one can take that away from you. So I set a goal. I said, all right, I know I want to be, over 300 pounds and not be fat. Like, how can I prove that I did that? The closest thing to that's probably going to be like getting a DEXA scan. So for like a few years, I had 4 years back to back of DEXA scans, from 215 pounds at like, I don't know, it's probably like 18% by some higher number. That probably sounds higher to most people, but when you do a DEXA,
Yeah.
not crazy. And so I competed in 2018, and my goal was over 3 years to get to 300 pounds under 15% body fat on a DEXA. And in the off season there, I was maybe 235, 240. And literally over 2 years, maybe a little bit less, I went from like 230, 240 in the off season to I had the piece of paper that's like the DEXA's 300 pounds, and I was 11% body fat.
Jesus.
So that happened. So I actually put on, from the first DEXA that I did over 3 years or so, I put on 100 pounds of lean body mass.
That's
Like
insanity.
on paper. And that like, win, lose, or draw, like I can hold up that piece of paper and be like, yeah, there's definitely some fluid retention, right? Like there's some things that probably sort of make that number a little bit, blown up if you're like, natural to enhance. But it's still 100 pounds. Like, and you see the pictures too. It's like no one can really take that away from you. Like, yeah, there's some error, but it's 100 fucking pounds. So that was cool, just to be able to like hold up that piece of paper and be like, all right, whether I'm a good bodybuilder or not, like I did this thing that like objectively happened. And I think there was something nice to just being able to say like, I made this change. So whether I'm like, running a business now or, building a body, like I just love creating things. And that's what's so awesome about bodybuilding. And I think, when we talk about, like natural versus enhanced, why do people make that switch? I just think it's way more fun. Not because I'm like more muscular. Like I really don't care how I look. Like, it's a weird thing to say as a bodybuilder. Like, I never went up to a magazine, when I was a teenager. It was, Ronnie Coleman was Mr. Olympia, and then Jay Cutler. I never went up to like a magazine was like, I think like that is a beautiful body, or like I think that's going to get me laid, or like,
Not.
it was simply like watching the videos of those guys and being like, oh, this is in their own hands to create, like they're doing this. And that was something that I think, at that age, especially, just the ability to sort of like control my circumstances, was very just potent for me at the time. And it just really, really resonated with me. Not that I knew that, but kind of like looking back on it, I think just that ability to be able to have control of, what happened to me was very important.
Absolutely. Like, look at that. Like, that 100-pound transformation is based purely on effort of inputs.
Yeah.
That is the proof on paper that the effort of these inputs led to this result. And for anyone, regardless of industry or endeavor, that is something that is extremely powerful. And you can draw a lot of strength from that, as you said, to draw parallels into other aspects of your life. Like, that to me is really, really cool.
So to your point before, like I had been training for 15 years natural. I graduated high school probably 215 pounds or so, very strong. I've been training since I was 12, and, training hard and training under good people, and learning, under good people. And then, when I did make that switch to enhance, maybe I was 230, or so, like at my peak. But I had already had maybe, 5 to 7 years of like, reasonably static progress. When you look back on it, you could see some incremental differences, but I still really enjoyed it, just trying to find ways to get better. So that's kind of what led to all the education, and just literally took me around the country, many times, just seeking out different people and learning from disciplines that were very, very like lateral to bodybuilding. Like I got far, far away from bodybuilding. I coached athletes. I worked with a lot of physical therapists over the years. And although it didn't directly contribute to me like building muscle at the time, I think the perspective that it gave me brought me to a very different place than I think most people sort of just staying in the bodybuilding realm did. Had I made that transition earlier, like had I been more muscular and more competitive earlier, I may not have, put the time towards those other areas of study, and may have, just not been intrigued to do so. So it's never really been about like, yeah, the outcome is being a better bodybuilder, but really the goal is just having a greater quality of life and just exploring things that I'm passionate about. So like I mentioned with the enhanced side of things, it's like, all right, once you've exhausted so many different, resources, things are relatively static, but the process that you enjoy is making progress and seeing inputs create results. That's all it was. And then I started talking, like to really smart people in that field. And I realized like, wow, there's so many parallels in this discipline to every other discipline. It's like you get in, once you, have a decent amount of knowledge in one area, and then you start speaking to an expert in another area, you realize like, wow, even though I know nothing about this other area, there's so much crossover. Like the key concepts, like just understanding how to learn, understanding the basic premise of a lot of these things, there's a ton of overlaps. So it's like, oh, I don't understand drugs, but I understand nutrition, or I understand training. It's like, yeah, but they all kind of follow the same principles. And once I realized how much overlap was there, it just became a lot of fun, again, to be able to put an input in and get a response out. But that was never with the mindset of like, oh, it's just because I want to look like this guy, or just because I want to be bigger. It was just naturally that process of like, oh, here's another thing that I can put an input in and get a result out of. And again, it didn't matter if it was bodybuilding, football, powerlifting, it didn't matter, if it was training, rehab, nutrition, or drugs. Like, it's just been fun to, find new inputs, experiment with them, and actually see, the results of that.
One of the most common threads that I see amongst high performers, whether I've been like exposed to them through my own education or even interacting with them in different fields, like my background personally, I was in collegiate athletics in the US for about 4 years, then moved back home, was in collegiate athletics. I competed at a very high level in powerlifting. And even my own journey, I look at, okay, in powerlifting, it's very much objective outputs. It's, does the weight on the bar increase? So I looked at all the different people that I was able to learn from, and the toolbox of knowledge that I was able to accrue has led me to a point where, at one time I squatted the 6th heaviest squat of all time in my weight class. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't sit back and say, where are my weaknesses? What don't I know? What different inputs can I gather to bring forward? And it's a common thread amongst everyone that I've spoken to, is they look at what they have at their disposal and they say, what am I missing? And they're not afraid to go out into these, we'll call them fringe aspects, right? As a bodybuilder pursuing professional bodybuilding, you wouldn't necessarily intuit that you would want to go see a physical therapist. You wouldn't necessarily intuit that you'd want to go see even someone who specializes in body work or breathing. But all of these things are different inputs that you can gather and add to your toolbox. And, I love that you credit that curiosity within the process to your success. I think that's very, very cool.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, like breathing, for example, right? Like, I have a coach named Seth Oberst. And Seth, do you know Seth by chance?
I heard the name Oberst, and I'm assuming he's related in some way to Robert. But anyway,
okay. I just saw a change in your expression. I was like, oh, maybe he knows it.
yeah.
But Seth is he's a DPT, he's a physical therapist by trade, but he specializes in self-regulation, which is basically an umbrella term for like helping you manage internally stresses, basically.
Okay.
So examples of where this might show up in bodybuilding is, I'm 285 right now. Like I said, I've been over 300 pounds. I'm in an off season, kind of escalating back up there now. Most guys at that body weight will use a CPAP device, which, I'm not opposed to, like, at all. I think it, can be super valuable. We have done work specifically, to improve my breathing, like during sleep, my ability to like keep my airway open. We've, done a lot of work to just manage like autonomic function during the day, as far as just like how much tension, how much stress, like, am I holding, just, sort of subconsciously.
Right.
And, that's an area, again, that just seems very, like lateral to, to what we do. You'll hear bodybuilders saying, like, oh, managing stress is everything. And you'll hear a lot of coaches say, like, a lot of the best athletes can just like, chill out or relax really easily, like turn it on, turn it off. But, having someone like that, or at least, again, just exploring the concepts which, underlie that, right? Like, what underlies how good your sleep is. It's not like your just like your melatonin, or having a dark room. Anyone who's woken up at 3 a.m. with like racing thoughts can attribute can relate to the fact that like your psychology, your emotions have a lot to do with all of that. So that's a tangent, but just to say, like, that is an example of someone who I've worked with for many years now, who you might not think of as like a traditional, coach in all of this. And he works with 0 other, bodybuilders, which I think sometimes can be a weakness. Like, I've definitely gone down routes where it's like, all right, I've gotten so far away from bodybuilding that, like, if you don't have a lot of context for like what might be different in someone like me versus the people that they're working with regularly, you can kind of miss the forest for the trees. That's easy to do, where it's like you get overconfident that like, yeah, nobody else, knows this stuff. And I'm, finding these little secrets or whatever. Most of the time it is a game of the forest, and it is understanding the big picture of like, massive shifts in body weight, make a big difference. They impact everything.
Mm-hmm.
So again, coming back to like, yes, I've learned a lot outside of bodybuilding, some stuff that's very specific that I don't use at all anymore. But in, thousands of hours of spending time in areas that are very, very lateral to this, I think the big picture of just understanding kind of like stress physiology and biology at large gives you some context to understand like, oh, this is a time where just in general, I need to flatten things out. Like I need to just kind of like maintain here and let things kind of like, come back to homeostasis, so to speak. There's some broad concepts like that where it's like, you can't just drug your way out of this. You can't just like, eat your way, under eat your way. And I think just an appreciation for that is really important, which is, a good segue, into the whole Stuart McGill thing, which like, I think Stu really brought me back to some fundamental concepts that, I understood well, but didn't have as much appreciation for in terms of how they fit into my programming. Where, I started college, like, for exercise science in 2009. I had an incredible professor, Dr. Pat Davidson, and, he introduced me to physical therapists like Shirley Sarman, Vladimir Yanda, and at the time, Stuart McGill was still teaching. He was doing his rounds at places like Perform Better. I was going to all those type of seminars, anything from the Perform Betters to, I would go at the time, the whole like Vladimir Yanda, Prague School of Thought became DNS, Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization. I would go to those type of seminars. And again, I would always make a point to actually find the people and just like shadow them or oftentimes get treated by them. So in this case, there was actually like a DNS institute in New York, so I would go to them, get treated by them. But anyway, that was just to say that like I had some background, on his teachings, like, and I think I just got the impression that like, well, Stu's stuff, is from, a couple decades ago, and like it's been incorporated into everything we're doing now. Like the people, at the forefront now, they read Stu's stuff, and like now we're just building off of that, and it's just gotten better from there. And that wasn't true. It just wasn't.
So I was going to kind of to take it from there, because the way in which you express your learning is very much the same way that I embody my own, is that I've always done better when I've either learned directly from the person or been coached by them. So when I was coming up, I was for powerlifting, I was purely self-coached. And I was like, okay, I can get more out of this. My first coach was Chad Wesley Smith, who, if you're familiar with Chad. Okay. So at the time, Chad was pushing towards an all-time world record. And I was like, I can learn something from this guy. And I did. Unfortunately, I ended up getting injured, having a surgery, chatted with Brian Carroll, whom reintroduced me to Stuart McGill after, his work with Stuart McGill. I had the pleasure of editing their book together and, meeting Stu, conversating with him. And it quickly made me realize like, okay, if you want to learn about these principles, the best way to get about it is to go directly to the source. Even someone like Louis Simmons. Louis Simmons has put out so much educational content, and he has done so much work with the highest level powerlifters. But Louis has read the same books as every other person. He's just intuited from it different information and packaged it in a new way. So it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to read the same books Louis read. Or, Brian learned from Stu. I'm going to go ask Stu, listen to Stu, read Stu. And now the coach that I have now, Danny LaMartina, I love what she does in terms of treating the training itself as a rehabilitation strategy. So I wanted to learn how to do that. So now Danny's coaching me. And I feel as though that's becoming further and further away from the norm, because people believe that the access they have to information on the internet and social media replaces that person's actual knowledge. You cannot distill decades of knowledge into 90-second clips. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want to gain the best insights possible from that person, go learn from them, go hear them speak, go get coached by them, go work for them for free, shadow them, intern for them. Like that, like it seems like that was almost transformative for you in your journey.
Yeah, it's funny that just reminded me of a story with Louis. So, one of the reasons I chose Springfield College is, it just got a rich history as far as strength conditioning goes. A lot of the strength coaches, in the US have come from Springfield College. And I love that it was like an applied exercise science program. I did a focus in strength conditioning, and the applied was just simply like we spent time in the weight room. Pat and I, another guy who's actually become, pretty famous now. His I guess moniker, his tag is like world's strongest gay. I don't know if you've heard of Rob.
Yeah.
So Rob, Pat, and I, Rob and I had like started separate teams like at different times at Springfield College. Like I had started a bodybuilding team. He had like a powerlifting team. And then we all came together. Pat became the head coach, and we had a strongman. We called it Team Iron Sports. So bodybuilding, strongman, powerlifting. Pat was the coach, so we go to school with him during the day, and then we'd all train together at night.
Nice.
And, we had like bodybuilding.com sponsored us, a bunch of other people, and we take the van to like the Arnold Classic, and it was just freaking awesome.
That's awesome.
Man. It's kind of a tangent, but it's just like I learned somewhat early on, like trying to do this as a solo mission was just very depleting, very emotionally exhausting to kind of be on like that Dorian Yates, just like tunnel vision, very limited community. It was like, oh, if this thing's going to be a bit more sustainable and a bit more holistic as far as how it fits into the quality of my life, let's try to make this more of a community type of event. And again, we both came from a sports background, so that's what I was used to. We literally would like get together before training and like have the same type of pump up things that you do before like a football game. We tried. Before that, it was just like me and one other friend, and we traveled around the country together. Like we went to Gold's Gym Venice, like when we were in college, actually during my prep, and we stayed down the street, like on the beach. Again, just kind of tying into the whole mindset of like a holistic lifestyle that kind of feeds into the bodybuilding thing. I had started a landscaping company like when I was in high school, so even when I was in college, like some of my friends were still, working for that back home. So I always had like, I didn't, grow up with much money or anything, but I always had money to put into bodybuilding. And I always, prioritized having free time. And those were like the two big things. And one sort of begets the other.
Of course.
And, with that, I was able to do things like, take trips, out to Venice, stay there for a week. And I would just walk in to the gym, literally walk up to like Charles Glass and be like, will you train us? And I just found like everyone that I did that with. Like I trained with Hidetada Yamagishi when I was there, a couple other pros. I don't think anyone charged us. We were like probably 18. I was 18 at the time. And just that passion, everyone was willing, and they just like, take us out to eat afterwards. And that happened so many times. So, it's funny. I think I may have started this, like just coming full circle, mentioning Louis Simmons, and then just like totally dropped that part.
Yeah.
So I'm bringing it full circle here. When again, still in college here, the team, I started talking about applied exercise science. So we did internships as part of the like applied exercise science program.
Okay.
And I did some internships at like a top physical therapy clinic where we did a lot with like the SFMA, which came off of the FMS, sort of like Gray Cook stuff. We were doing stuff again with DNS and PRI at the time. A lot of people won't know those acronyms, but they're physical therapy modalities essentially. And I was still in that sector of strength conditioning, and it's like there were a few big places that you might go to, Cressy's, Boyles, iFast, which Bill Hartman, Mike Robertson. So those are all the things that like my friends and I were going to, and I've been to all those places. Shout out some of those guys. So for me, again, just kind of like knowing that I was into the bodybuilding, strength training thing, it was kind of two polar different directions. Either I was going to go out to California and intern at Athletes Performance, which is now called Exos, or I actually hit up Louis Simmons as well. And I kept the voicemail on my phone for some time just because it was so funny, and his voice is so funny, like on the phone. But again, it was just one of those situations where I just called the gym, and you just like leave a message for Louis. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he called me back and he left a message, on the phone. And ultimately, like, I decided to go, to Athletes Performance. But a lot of times you just fucking call someone, or you're just like, the same thing with Stu. The way Stu came about is I'd gotten to a point where basically I couldn't even bend over to change the pin on selectorized equipment. So like when Ben and I were training together, he would literally change my weights. He would literally move the pin for me. Like there were I remember, like Pat, like tying my shoes for me to like get into, a leg press and stuff like that. It's just like you have that mentality of just, kind of whatever it takes, The number of times that like my wife had to dress me, it's like, it's hard to think about. But anyway, Ben and I would take like, our pre-workout walk around the block, which, is still a thing for me to this day because of Stu, different capacity. And he said to me, because again, we were kind of at this impasse. He said to me, "Who's the first person you think of when it comes to back pain?" And I said, "Stu." And, he knew me well enough at the time to know that like, that was it. That was the only thing he needed to say. And that like, I was just going to work with Stu. It was like, doesn't matter if he's retired, doesn't matter where he is in the world right now. I'm going to find someone that knows him, and we're going to find some way to do this. And it was a very certain feeling. Like when he asked me that and I said Stu, it was just like, okay, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And it turned out, Stu was retired and all that, but it was like, okay, now let's think, like, who do I know that might know him? And it was basically like, he had done a seminar for someone that I knew, and that guy knew his son. And it was just like one person, reached out to the next person. And definitely less than a year later, probably like, maybe 6 months later, like I was in Stu's, backyard, and he was grilling up burgers, and, we were shooting the shit. So like things, escalated quickly. And it's, it's been a great relationship.
Knowing him, he was probably grilling up burgers and had like a laser focus on you, watching every single movement you made.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point we had already done the assessment. I was already like, out of pain and everything. And it was just like, let's just get together, and just like shoot the shit. And he's been just such a tremendous resource. And I think just like following up on, some of the things he's brought, to my training, again, it kind of just circles back to just like the basic, premises of like biology stuff I learned back in school that I just didn't respect as well as I could have. And just experiencing it a lot of times is the best teacher. And I think more than anything, like just some passive rest and just allowing enough time for, an adaptation cycle to take place is the most like fundamental thing that I needed to appreciate. And in practice, what that meant is like, you know, a little bit more time like in between sessions. So it was lowering, you know, training frequency for me. Like, of course, you know, I do the big three, you know, every day before training. I take my walks. But I think just like an appreciation for the specificity of what I do. Whereas like, I think as a premise, most of the other really all of the other physical therapy that I had done before that, all the other rehab I had done before that, was focused on how do I balance like the bad shit I'm doing to myself. It's like, you know, I think we sort of see it, you know, loosely as like, oh, you're getting, you know, tighter and you're getting, you know, you're losing this, that, and the other thing. And like, how do we get that stuff back? Like, how do you not go too far down this end, you know, of the spectrum? And let's just try to maintain enough of these qualities. So like the word variability was really a buzzword, like maybe 10 years or so ago.
Even more frequently, even more frequent. Yeah, for sure.
It's like, definitely don't know right now what, you know, the buzzwords are, but
Yeah,
like,
I'll fill you. I'll keep you up to date. Don't worry about it.
so yeah, but we really went in the opposite direction, which was just like, what are the needs, you know, of your, you know, quote unquote sport here? And like, how do we just make you more resilient to that? And how do we allow enough time for those adaptations to take place? And rather than, and you know, also just learning more specifically about how to design and set up exercises, which I've learned a lot from Tom Purvis as well. And he's kind of had, you know, his descendants like, you know, Cassim from N1 and Ben. And the combination of the two of just like improving what I'm already doing rather than looking outside of it. It's the old adage of like, you know, fixing the leak in the ceiling rather than like cleaning up the floor. I think so often, especially as like motivated people, we're just like, what else, what more do I need to do? Mm-hmm. So the basic premise of like, you need to do something extra versus you need to do what you're doing now better, or even more importantly, what are you doing now that's hurting you? Like the reason why you have an issue is because you're doing something wrong, usually not because you're lacking something. And I think that basic premise, you know, was really, really important to me. It's like, no, you don't need to go out and find more things, you know, and more tools right now. You need to do, you know, less of these things, or you need to modify these things. And it didn't explicitly just come out of Stu being like, oh, you know, ditch these exercises, do these. Like so many instances, he did not tell me what to do. It was just many conversations with him and reading through his stuff and listening to every interview I've ever found with him. And just more and more the mentality of like, you know, not that we need to add these exercises and you need to get this range of motion back and you lack this thing or the other thing. It's just like, you know, these are the demands of your sport. This is the time, you know, that it's going to take to recover, and you can test that hypothesis. It's not just like something you look up in a textbook. And being able to like clear the slate enough where you could sense a difference. You know, it was the first time I had taken months off of training altogether. And then when I reintroduced stuff, I reintroduced it slowly. I titrated things up in a manner where I could actually have some clarity in the signal. You know, I could sort through the noise and I could see, you know, okay, if I do a little bit too much of this or this particular activity, I could actually sense for the first time, you know, what was problematic. And during that same time, you know, I was also working with, you know, the person for self-regulation that I mentioned before, Seth. And that also helped me just as far as interoceptive or like internal feedback of being able to sense like, you know, what sort of things were problematic, what sort of things, you know, were sort of setting off a threat response. And all of that together just allowed me to have a better, you know, internal sense of like what was going on, and a better sort of like, in broader sense of how to program with the mindset of like not finding the edge, not looking for the edge, but actually like trying to stay pretty clear of it and just appreciating like, you know, small incremental progress. So again, I think as someone who's like, you know, hyper motivated, a lot of times we don't know that we're working hard enough unless we have certain cues to tell us that. And I think those cues oftentimes are actually when we've gone too far.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think I would just set up a paradigm where it was like, if I didn't find the edge, then I had no other way to sense, you know, where I was. So it was constantly just finding the edge. And it could be in anything. It could be the edge in training volume. It could be the edge in load. It could be the edge in food volume. But every single training block was designed in such a way to get to a point, you know, to find the edge at the end of that. And I don't think that makes you more resilient. I think in many ways it actually decreases your resiliency. And, you know, Stu used the example. He's speaking very specifically, you know, to a back injury, but he'll use the example of like, you know, stubbing your toe and then, you know, just constantly banging on it, or you know, just creating, instead of like allowing a, you know, an injury to callus, just constantly picking the scab. And that idea of picking the scab, I think was just, you know, chronically what I was doing is just living at the edge of what I could tolerate versus, you know, having an understanding of where that edge was and staying pretty clear of it, and just appreciating, you know, small incremental gains.
There's a lot to be drawn from that. The first thing that came to mind when you were speaking was we started our conversation discussing the wide breadth of knowledge and learning that you went through, and then coming to a point where you're like, I just need to do less of everything and figure out what works and only do that. But you maintain this open mind to other things, right? So there's a balance to be struck there. The other is you have two paradigms in training almost, where, you know, there's that person who finds the edge and backs off, or that person who rides the edge as long as possible. And the easiest example of that's like, you know, a Russian weightlifting program where it's designed for people to fail, and the only people that succeed are, it's like a survival of the fittest mentality. And there are people who reach high levels of success with that mentality just because they are so gifted at what they do. But there are those of us who need to adopt more of a, like, you know, say your red line is at 7,000 RPM. I'm a 5 to 6 guy. I do really well at 5 to 6, and I ride it as long as I can. And the reason for that in my mind is it provides a buffer for life. Because if my training is always at a 5 to 6, but then my life becomes a 7 or an 8, well, then I have enough buffer that my global allostatic load is going to allow me to still recover from training and have fun with it. But that only came by fucking myself up.
Yeah, yeah. That's the ironic thing. It's like, you know, health is wasted on the young, sort of. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there is the mentality, you know, it's always a double-edged sword, right? It's like to be the person that's going to push hard enough to be at, you know, the upper ends of performance. You're probably also going to find the edge of fatigue, you know, and the edge of tolerance. So you sort of need that mentality to get there, but that mentality is also the thing that's very destructive, you know, and that's where the coaching comes in, right? That's where people like you know, work with younger athletes and can sort of, you know, guide them. And that's, you know, that's the gift, right? It says, as Brian says, like the gift of injury is perspective.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that that's a perfect segue, because a lot of what I try to do on this podcast, especially, is, you know, you are a coach, you're a trainer, you're a business owner, as well as a high level athlete. I want to like just chat first about like, how do you balance the two things? We chatted a little bit before we started about the way you've organized your business, and something that struck me as really unique is you don't do any remote work. You commute into the city. I believe you said about an hour each way, a couple times a week to do your job. And Modern Meathead is like the first remote type of work that you've done. So how can you give people a rundown of like how you organize your training business?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really start for me there. It kind of starts more broadly,
Okay.
which is like designing your life, which has simply just been like, you know, as a teenager, again, being, one of those hyper motivated type people for, um, I don't know if you watch like the Arnold documentary on
Of
Netflix or
course.
listen to basically every interview with any bodybuilder, but there's usually some type of pain point that just like drives you to really hyper focus on like a future vision. And then we kind of look back on it later and we're like, yeah, there were some good things and some bad things about that, but like, I had a very clear vision, at like a young age, of like what I wanted my life to look like, and much like finding the coaches and, just deciding like this is the way it's going to be. I think, some of us sort of learn those skills at a young age where it's just like, I'm going to decide to do this. Um, for me, it wasn't really ever about like being popular or, even being like rich. Um, I think probably a big influence was like when I was in high school, my dad passed away. He had committed suicide. And I think that really like shaped my perspective on like what, was important. Again, sort of like subconsciously, but my motivation was more just like, how do I shape a great life? And that certainly like having enough money, is important. And sometimes in the process of doing that, people learn who you are. But it was never a motivation of just like, I want to be a famous bodybuilder or I want to be, rich CEO or whatever it was. It was just like, I just want to have the life that I imagined. And I kind of just always like would envision what that would be like, and it just kind of got recreated throughout the years. It was like college was awesome because I had this like team of amazing guys where they're all not only really driven to train and compete, but also to learn. And we just like laughed a ton together. We all ate together, like as a community, trained together, learned together, and like man, it's like how does it get any better than that? Like there's no amount of money you could give me that's like better than that setup. And I just try to recreate that, like everywhere I went basically. And now my primary clientele, I would say my average person is like a guy in their like 50s 60s, who's done very well for themselves, usually like the owner of a company, a number of people that like you would know by name. And like that that type of person ironically just wants to do more of what we do. Oftentimes it's just like they want to train more, they want to like again eat with friends, laugh with friends. And it's like I work with some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they want the same things that we do, and they're like excited to come work out. And during the pandemic, like I trained some of these guys in the park, with a shopping cart full of weights and homeless people right next to them, literally like sharing the weights with us. And they don't care, because they're just like fundamental things that we all love doing. Like we're outside in the sun, working out, um, sweating together, just like working hard. And I think again, like some of that is achieved by having enough wealth, but there's certainly a cutoff as well.
For sure.
So it's just been like, how do I design a life that just encompasses those things, to the greatest degree? So the reason I chose to move to New York City, I was going to school again in Springfield, Massachusetts. Um, and there were a number of other routes I could have gone from there, ranging from, working like with a sports team to working at a physical therapy clinic, like that sort of stuff. But New York screamed opportunity for me because on a personal training level, there's a few things. Like one, the compensation per hour is so much higher than just about anywhere else in the country. I'm sure there's some spots in LA and a couple other spots in the country, but mainly New York, also because of the density, right? Like even if you go to LA, you're not walking place to place. So New York, probably more than anywhere, you're getting a higher compensation for your time. And even though the people say cost of living is higher, like, yeah, even if your apartment, let's say, is, quadruple the price, that's only a small part of your expenses. It's only part of your expenses. So if you're making, quadruple the price per hour on personal training, it still works out as a largely net positive. Like, if you're in some like podunk town making $30, an hour, and you pay, maybe $500 a month in rent, versus if you're in New York City, you're making $200 an hour or whatever it is, and maybe you're paying, 4,000 in rent. At the end of the year, yeah, you pay 48,000 in rent versus, we'll call it, 5,000, 10,000, in rent. But the amount you make overwhelms that by so much that the goal was always just to have more free time. And then also, again, the right, community. So also in training these type of people, like, I've made tremendous connections, tremendous relationships, like, and it's not like the relationships are around like, well, how do I leverage this person, to meet this other person? It's more just like people from multiple disciplines that, are able to teach me through their life experience and their knowledge, like things that just I otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. Like, you just, and good and bad, like maybe more bad than good, in the
Sure.
sense that, like, you get to see what not to do. And you realize, like, when you spend every day with people that you thought, maybe you wanted to be, you get to see, or that other people aspire to be, you get to see what's the reality of that lifestyle. Like, what are you really pushing towards? And when you see the end of it, maybe that's not who you want to be. And maybe they just want to do what you're doing. And it's kind of ironic, right? Like, a lot of the finance guys just end up like, the goal is like, let's just make enough money so I can basically live like these personal trainers are living.
Yeah.
So every year it's just been actually less and less work. So it was always, how can I have the most free time so I can reinvest that time in other endeavors, be it bodybuilding, be it education. And it's like, and it was the same advice I gave Ben, when he first came. He, recounted this to me the other day. He said, everyone basically told me how to, build up my personal training business bigger and just get as many clients as I could. And this is how you do it. And the advice, I gave him was train the least amount of people you possibly can and spend the most amount of time investing in yourself. And what'll happen is you'll become more and more valuable versus just fixing yourself in the same place. And also, I could give that advice to Ben because it was very clear that he had something special. That advice I don't think applies to everyone. Like, not just like we were talking about with bodybuilding in terms of like having the genetic structure. There are things, in bodybuilding, it seems to be very focused on like the sort of morphological shape of your physique. But like, genetics are also, your intelligence. Genetics are also like your, even emotional traits, like, in a lot of ways. So there's so many other things that encompass genetics. And for him, whatever environmental and genetic influences led him to be the person he is, it was very clear to me early on, like, this person could reinvest their time and do something special with it. So I gave him the same advice, that I gave to myself, which was do the least amount of training you possibly can, charge the most amount you can for it, and just continually reinvest and build yourself, as a person. So I did the most sessions as a personal trainer, like my first 2 years. And then every year I've just worked less and less hours. And now the way that I do bodybuilding is like, I just barely work. Like, I do maybe like 3 hours on average a day at the most. But the funny thing is, I kind of need those 3 hours. I realize, like, I look at Ben's lifestyle, and he and I talked a lot about this before he transitioned. And it was like, it's actually much harder for me on like a Sunday, if I'm not working, to get all my meals in, to sort of like have my day structured in a way that works well for bodybuilding. So it's all, pretty purposeful. Like, the, 40 minutes on the train on the way in was purposeful because, sitting on this like spacious train going along the Hudson River, and I can actually set aside time, to read every day. So it's like, this is time, for reading. And, it's not like being at home where you have a lot of other things maybe that you could be doing. And then when I get into the city, it's like the people that I'm working with, most of them I've worked with for years, we're very good friends. Like the gym is full of my friends, it's like family to me.
Really cool vibe at that gym.
Yeah, it's all equipment I've picked out, and we're buying 6 new pieces now. So it's like I have all the benefits of that gym that would come with owning it, with none of the responsibility of it. So it's like
Nice.
I pick out all the equipment. These are all like good friends of mine. My clients are all good friends of mine, and I show up. I get 12,000 steps a day, like just between commuting, taking the 3 walks that Stu recommends. 2 of them are in the woods behind the house with the dog. If I didn't have that, like even if I could make the same amount of money but I didn't have those few sessions and I didn't go into the city and see my friends and learn stuff from my clients, and then again those lead to other connections, but more importantly it's just like staying physical, staying engaged, like having like human beings that you see every day. That's actually like really essential for my bodybuilding. I don't think I could do it as well if I worked virtually, even though I know that's very appealing.
Well, it's something like there's a few things that I want to tease out from that, but that piece is, as I do 99% of my work online, I will always maintain 3 to 5 hours of personal training per week, simply because of that interpersonal communication, the ability to have eyes on someone physically, the ability to actually interact and form a relationship with somebody, to me is invaluable. Even if for me, I actually lose money per hour doing that, the importance of that far exceeds. And then when it comes to the routine aspect, if anyone I'm probably the most type A person you'll ever meet. Every hour of my day is blocked out because for me, routine is everything. So I actually found in prep, when I did my first show, I was the most productive I've been in so long because I had those non-negotiable tasks to do every day. And I've carried that forward since. I mean, losing a few hours of sleep because I was so hungry helped with my productivity for sure. But overall, I mean, that routine aspect is something that I try to preach to everyone that I work with. But in terms of you didn't start at, I'm going to run this business and then I'm going to live my life. You started as, I want to have this sort of life. How do I architecture my business around the life that I want to live? And you essentially reverse engineered it from there, all the while remembering that you are your business. So any investment into yourself is an investment into your business, which again is something I think a lot of people lose track of, because the number of people that I interact with on a daily basis that say, oh man, I've had to put my competition and my own personal endeavors on the back burner because of my business. Immediately, I'm like, you're doing it wrong. Immediately. Because if you cannot be the example to which your clients should aspire to be in terms of the attitude, the demeanor, the routine, the results to some aspect, especially in the beginning of your career, the results that you have speak very, very loudly to your clients, then you have no leg to stand on. So you are your business, and every investment into yourself is an investment into your business. And I love that you started off saying, like, I want more free time and I want to invest in myself. And through that, my business will grow. And I thought the last piece there is you invest heavily into things that you really love doing. And it's funny because I literally just made a post this morning on Instagram. It was an excerpt from one of my coaching calls with my group mentorship. Was think of the things that you do on a daily basis that make time pass the fastest. How do you cultivate more time to do those things? And that's really how you've built your life and your business.
Yeah, the days definitely pass a little too fast sometimes. Yeah, but I definitely don't have that same sense of like, maybe urgency that I did in the beginning, which in terms of like, sitting down and just constantly reorganizing like the schedule and try to, optimize all the hours. And I think there's just like chapters or there's just sort of phases of life where that gets kind of reset again. And I think, in the same context of like what I was saying with Stu, this recent chapter has been just pulling back, on some stuff and just allowing things, to flow a little bit more naturally and just making things easier from the standpoint of like, if you can accomplish the same result, but do it easier and it feels easier, that's okay. When the only feedback you ever get is like, if I work harder, then I get better results. I think we learn to associate the two, and sometimes falsely, that like, if I don't feel like I'm working hard, that means I'm not in the right place. And I think those two can, get really tangled and associated together, and then it becomes hard to dissociate this idea of like, I'll still have this feeling like, oh, I'm not, not grinding, like, not suffering, like not like feeling how I expect to feel, therefore that means something's wrong. And it's just something that I've had to decondition a little bit, and I've definitely asked myself a lot, like when I'm done with quote unquote work most days at like 11:30 or something, and then it's basically just like bodybuilding, right? And
Yeah.
Some of it takes like a lot of time, just like random shit. It's like getting ready for the gym and then training for a few hours, driving back from the gym, and it's like, man, this is like a 6-hour process. And like, I definitely don't think it has to be, and make it sound like, it's too long or it's a burden. Like, no, that's like exactly what I want my day to be. But it's just funny, even being there now, I'm kind of like, man, like this doesn't feel like it used to feel. Like this should feel harder. Like I should feel like, it's a little bit like more stressful. And it just hasn't been. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think it'll come in seasons. Like I think there'll be another season as the next business ramps up, where it's like, okay, now we're balancing things a little bit. But
You're gonna
for right
prep soon.
now,
You're gonna prep soon too.
yeah, prep will definitely be a thing. But right now I'm just like not traveling, not doing a lot of like seminars and stuff out of state or whatever. And just like the weeks are pretty similar, and it's all good. Like there's really nothing that like needs to change. There's nothing that like needs to be any more difficult than it is. And that's like it's kind of a funny feeling, where it's just like, oh, it's not supposed to be like this. There's supposed to be some sort of like angst, and it comes up here and there. But for the most part, this season is one of just kind of like, all right, let's just keep it in a good place. Let's just keep things, steady.
Um, I don't know how comfortable you are speaking about this. We kind of glanced over it. You said that you're married.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty common nowadays to, oh, it's so hard being married to a bodybuilder. And all I'm thinking about is like, this guy is so good at organizing his life. He seems to have very low stress. Your wife must love it.
she's somewhere behind me. No, it's like, I mean, I think again, I'm sort of describing where things have migrated towards, like as a direction,
Gotcha.
right? But only like as a perspective from, I mean, I won't have her like hop on the camera here and tell you like what our first prep together was like, but it was right before we got married, and things have things have changed like pretty dramatically in terms of just my ability to sort of like do the same tasks but with less effort.
There almost wasn't a wedding.
Oh no.
That's not true.
You'd have been happy leaving that part out, eh?
Yeah, I mean that's a little bit of an exaggeration.
All right.
But yeah, I was literally like prepping in 2018 that and we had the wedding, I don't know, like a month or two after that. But no, I mean, she's seen like the highest highs and the lowest lows. We've been together for 10 plus years at this point. So, and now we actually started training together recently.
Oh, okay.
She's not like a bodybuilder or even a fitness enthusiast by a long stretch. But just as I've gotten, slightly better at sort of managing my level of like excitation, we'll say, intensity, something, I still work on, and it's still something that like to a degree needs to be there, when you actually get underneath, heavy weights. But just being able to sort of flip that switch back and forth, when you're at home, playing with the dog versus like, in the gym, under the bar. I would say like bodybuilding at first was something that she almost like tolerated in a sense. It was like, okay, this is in a lot of ways what makes you who you are, and a lot of, those traits I really love about you. And I'll take, sort of the double-edged sword, kind of the good with the bad that comes with that. And the really cool thing over the years is more and more it's become like a team effort, as opposed to this is something that I tolerate. Like this is something, that I want to be a part of, something that like, that she may never do, directly herself, but that actually like adds, to our relationship, versus takes away from it. And, and by no stretch when I say, things have gotten better with that, and we've learned things along the way, and now we're training together, and she helps with meal prep and all this stuff. It's not like, every day is, sunshine and rainbows all the time, but the progression has been really cool, because I think for the most part, like people don't tend to change, when we're adults. And seeing how we've both been able to kind of adapt over the years and take a little bit from each other. Like, her profession has always been like working with kids and working, in a not-for-profit setting, working, anywhere from like kids who have like learning disabilities to kids who have terminal illnesses. So it's always been a career that was just heavily involved, like heavily just empathy driven, heavily like, giving back. And, just being able to, pull from that. And she's kind of pulling from some of like that, type A personality. And I really have seen the two of us just like, shift a little bit like over the years, and the coming together of those two things like is certainly something that's possible. And it's really cool now on this journey, like getting ready for the New York Pro, that it's something we're doing together. And that, when you do get to the end of all of it, win, lose, or draw, having those people there, to celebrate with, that we're there for the journey, that's everything.
Plus, if she's training with you and you leave reps in the tank, she's going to think you're a pussy. So
I don't even think she knows what reps in the tank are. That's how far away she is from this world.
That didn't look hard enough. Keep going. All right. So I usually like to finish this off. I want to be conscious of your time too, because it is Sunday and I'm sure you want to spend it with your family. So I have a couple quick hit questions. First one being, when you crack an egg, do you crack it on the corner of the pan or on a flat surface?
If I was going to, be the corner for sure. But these days it's it's meal delivery. We're going mega fit.
Oh wow, okay.
No eggs are being cracked, but it would be the corner of the pan historically.
What is the scariest set you've ever done?
Scariest, like life threatening.
Yes. Whatever you attribute to the scariest.
Okay. I'm just gonna go total left field here. When we were in college with that team, again, we used to just like travel to different gyms, around the state, around the country. And this is just like the stupidest thing ever, but we did lunges, and like there happened to be like a road in between like where we were going and like the hill we were going to lunge up, and we just lunged like across the street while there were like cars still coming and stuff with weights, and then up the next hill, or like with the same team with a few guys, one day we just set out to do 1,000 pull-ups, just see how many hours it would take to like collectively between the three of us do 1,000. That's not scary at all, but it's goofy. Like it's silly shit.
Those are good stories.
When I was at Athletes Performance, I not only used to go on the weekends to Gold's Venice, but I would go to Metroflex in Long Beach.
Yep.
And that, I think that's actually where like what's it, like CT Fletcher and like those type of guys were training. So I would just, I show up just like in the morning before the gym opened, and I would just sit there, and just whoever came in that was like, big and strong, I'd be like, oh, what are you training today? He was like, oh, I'm training chest. The next day I'm training back. And I would just train, with just multiple people, like just sit up front and just like ask people what they're training. Like, oh, I'm training that, too today. So I think the guy's name is like Rashid. He became like a pretty famous, like, Instagram lifter dude, along with the whole like CT Fletcher thing. He was one of those guys, again, I had no idea who he was at the time, but he was one of those guys that was just like, oh, what are you training today? And I remember we went outside and just like, we did a mile-long prowler race, just like on the street.
Oh, that's gross.
None of that really like makes me think back in terms of like, oh, those things were so miserable, but they're just like funny examples to me of shit that like I can immediately remember, which is just like, oh, there's no reason for that. Like, it's not a good idea.
No.
It's just funny shit.
I've done like, I'm thinking back to like some stupid shit. I did a 1 mile yoke walk once. Why? I was trashed for like a week.
Exactly.
5 people, dead or alive, at dinner. Who you bring?
I've heard this one. This is the question I've heard on a podcast, and I've been like,
oh, I've stolen all of these.
Yeah. No, but this is when I've like explicitly started to think about and just be like, no, never mind. I don't know. Data. Okay. Man. Let me get a next. Do you have another question after this one?
Yeah. So if you wanted to see one person on my podcast, who would it be? You got to help me get them on.
Ooh. I mean, I could probably help you get Stu on.
I got Stu's phone number, man. You got to do better than that.
Yeah, that's right. You did already tell me that.
Yeah.
I almost want to say that guy Seth that I talked about earlier, just because it's like so, off topic from like stuff. That could be an interesting person for sure. That's like the first person that comes to mind, because we were just
dude, I would love to chat with him.
Because there might be some things there, again, like you have some clients that probably deal with sleep apnea.
Me.
Yeah, we talked about like, these sort of psychological and emotional components of all this, that comes into it a lot. I think on like the 5-person thing, man, it's just like there really isn't a lot of people that have just like, oh, I really like, idolize this person, and I just like, I have to meet them, I have to talk about them. I think if I was like, when I've heard really intelligent people answer this question, and they're, I've heard like Jesus as an answer, or I've heard like, there's usually some like physicist that they like, I wouldn't know what to say, like to either one of those people. And it's just like, man, if there's someone that I wanted to meet, like, I feel like I would just meet them.
You just call them.
I feel like I would figure it out, like, I mean, you could say, oh yeah, it would be cool to like meet Arnold or whatever. Like, I guess, if we had something to talk about, like, it might be cool to like, just, say I met, but I don't like have anything at the tip of my mind. Like there, when I have questions for people, like I keep a tab in my iPhone notes, and I'll have like a Ben Giannis tab, like some shit will come into my mind and be like, oh, I want to ask Ben this, or I want to ask Seth this, or, so I might have like a dozen people that, I regularly talk to, and I'll just pop down questions for them. Like, for the most part, I just want to answer those type of questions, where it's like, I don't really know what I would ask Arnold, like if I had the chance to talk to him.
So whenever I think about questions like that, and some people give really, really interesting answers. Like I had Andrew Locke was on the podcast with me last week. It's going to launch this coming week, but he mentioned he had like a philosopher, and then he had like Lemmy, the famous guitarist.
Okay.
I was like, that doesn't go together at all, but cool.
Yeah, it can really like tell you about the person's personality. Like I don't have that many, hobbies like outside of this whole thing.
Mhm.
A lot of stuff kind of peripheral to it, but mostly it's just like, spending time with, my wife and the dog. We'll go out for a hike after this, actually with one of my clients. But yeah, there's just not like I'll read a good amount of stuff. Like right now, I'm reading a book called The Design of Everyday Things.
Okay.
It's helping me a little bit with like conceptualizing this design for this app, that I'm working on. And it's like, so I've read some stuff like that in the past. You read things that are pretty far away again from the whole like exercise science topic. But I have friends that are just like, Mensa level, just super genius, smart. And it's like I stand on the shoulders of those people. What I would do actually is I would just take some of the smart people I know and I would just have them sit down in the room with someone else. Like I feel like they would get better content, So I think the way I would arrange it is like I have a coach named Broderick Chavez,
Yep.
who's like the drug guy. I think Broderick would be a great guy to have in the room because he's super freaking smart. He's just kind of like, Lyle McDonald.
Yep.
He's friends with Lyle, and it's just like, they tolerate each other. They're both like, highly intelligent people, but also just hate everybody. And I can get along with those people pretty well. I don't know like what that says about me, but Broderick and I get along pretty well. So I think I'd almost just rather pick one of those people like in my circle and just be like, all right, just record this, and let you ask the right questions. Because I don't even think I'm the right person to like interview those guys. So again, that might like, tell a little bit about my like, insecurities or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think there's like a better person probably to interview, Aristotle than me.
Dude, I really enjoyed this chat. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day for this. The ongoing joke, as you said, if you want to find you, you'll figure out a way because you don't want to be found. But I do have your Instagram tagged in the show notes, and you'll be doing some work with Modern Meathead as well. So I've tagged that as well. So if you guys want to get a hold of Ethan, modernmeathead.com, or find him on Instagram, _IFBB Pro, and message someone that isn't him to get in touch with him. And you go from there. Ethan, thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Paul. This was great.
Thanks, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.